We didn't do that. But we have people going and saying this is a great environmental area. Maybe I'll find how many of you have gone up there as a Senate side. But let's think about nice security. And I get run every 2 years. I'm not one of you guys, every 6 years. And I've supported this and fought for it 13 times. 13 times I've moved it out of the House and it's died on the Senate side, but once. And President Clinton vetoed it because he said it wouldn't relieve the embargo we had that quickly. Now think about that a moment. If we are to be energy sufficient to control the international instances that can be faced, we need ANWR. The Congress recognized it when we passed the Alaska National Lands Act. Scoop Jackson, Warren Magnuson, Mo Udo, John Seiberling, all agreed to this provision because they knew the value of that oil and the value to this nation. And now we're fighting the same battle again because of the ignorance and misinformation from those that would not have any resources development at all, not only in Alaska. We're easy to pick on because it's a 3-person delegation, but the nation as a whole, to make us less strong, to make us a second-rate nation. That's what a lot of you wish to do. As a House member, I'm going to pass this again, and I hope you have the courage to do what's right for this nation. What's good for Alaska, what's good for the nation, and good for all the people in the future. Madam Chairman, I do thank you for having this hearing, and I will remember and remind you, look at that little blue dot of my nose. That is the 1002 area. I don't think it changed my appearance very much because the coastal plain is not that pristine area you see in the propaganda as portrayed by all the environmental groups. It's a flat terrain that in fact was set aside by this Congress and the Washington senators for the development, not the preservation. I yield.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for being here. Governor Walker, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today. I am the governor of Alaska. I am nonpartisan. I have a goal as a governor that future generations will be able to have the same benefits growing up in Alaska that I had growing up in Alaska. Born in the territory, Lieutenant Governor Malott, also born in the territory. We've seen many changes in our state and many for the good. Alaska is different. Resource development is in our DNA. We've done that long before statehood. We'll continue to do that. That's how we earn, it was 90% of our income, now 70% of our income from resource development. We've done it for a long time. We do it right. We're careful in what we do. We're very vigilant of the environment. I remember well when we became a state. It was a day we celebrated. The deal we made was a statehood compact. It said that Alaska, we cannot sell the resources in the ground. We have to live off of them. We have to live off the royalties of them. That's how we fund our state. That was the deal then. We accepted that deal. What we didn't understand and didn't realize is that we may not be able to have access to resources responsibly developed, to live off those resources. That was the deal. All I'm asking for is that we get the deal that we made in 1959 under the statehood compact. The great compromise that was made under ANILCA was that the 1002 was set aside for future development. That's what the deal was. All we're asking for is the benefit of the deal that was made long ago. This has become something that I have lived with as an Alaskan resident all my life, and now I'm dealing with it as the governor of Alaska in many ways, which I'll get to. The Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. The only thing wrong with the oil pipeline is 3/4 empty. 3/4 empty, sitting next to, miles away, from the most prolific area of hydrocarbons you can imagine. 10 billion barrels. You know, this is not about money. This is not about who gets what money in Alaska. This is about a future. This is about an economy. This is about the young people that want a decent education. You know, I want to thank the committee members that came to a field hearing in Bethel and went on to a location in Oscarville. You saw a part of Alaska that many have not seen, and I thank you very much for doing that. I'm a big believer in seeing firsthand what Alaska looks like. You know, we are a vast state, as we all know. We own, as the state of Alaska, 242 airports. The reason we do that is that 80% of our communities do not have roads. When we talk about infrastructure, upgrading infrastructure, we don't have enough infrastructure to upgrade. You know, I sat in a listening circle in Utqiagvik a few years back, and one of the elders said to me, he said, I was not governor, he said, Mr. Walker, it's my goal as a grandfather to see one of my grandchildren flush a toilet in their village. If the infrastructure that we need needs to be paid for out of the resources, that was the deal we made with Congress when we became a state. We need the benefits of that bargain, and we need it now. You know, as I came into office, it was a $1.6 billion deficit. That quickly grew to a $3.7 billion deficit per year. I've had to do things I hope no future governor ever has to do. We've had to make some very, very difficult decisions. I've had to say no to some very good requests for help, for funding. We have had to close facilities across the state, lay off thousands of people. We have reduced our budget by $1.7 billion. That's a tough thing to do in a couple years. That hurts. Public safety. Alaskans don't feel safe right now because we've gone too far in that direction. We're having a special session right now as we speak to bring that safety back. You know, I signed recently, earlier this week, a climate change administrative order. We have stood up a climate change team. You know, we address both in Alaska. We are looking at climate change. Climate change is impacting Alaska, there's no question about it. We're looking at having to relocate as many as 12 of our villages. I've been to Kivalina. I've seen that island becoming a smaller island, but we cannot do it without the resources, the financial resources to do it. I don't see it coming from Washington to relocate 12 villages. So we need to look at how can we bring in the revenue? The only way we can do it is off our resources. You know, Alaska is unique that, you know, the beauty above ground is unparalleled. The beauty below the ground is unparalleled as well. The beauty below the ground is our resources that we need to develop responsibly. As a governor, I can tell you that the support in the Alaska legislature has been 90%. Last year was the last resolution passed, 90% in support of this. Please, please, let us develop our resources responsibly so we can fund our state, we can make Alaskans feel safe, we can fund our education, we can fund our health services. Our health services are the highest in the nation by multiples. Please let us have the benefit of the bargain that we made in 1959 with this body. Thank you very much for your time today. Good job.
Governor, Senator, Congressman, thank you for not only your testimony here this morning, putting into perspective from a historical perspective, from a defense perspective, from a resource perspective. It has great value to the conversation, and we certainly appreciate it. I know, Congressman, it's a long way over to the House side, so we will let you get back as we move to our second panel, but I want to thank each of you.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, Madam Chair, but I'm glad to see so many of my colleagues up there on this side all served with me.
See, it's not so bad on the Senate side.
Everybody but Abraham Lincoln served with me. I'll tell you right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, could I ask the governor a quick question?
We were not prepared to do questions, but if it's very quick, I think we can.
Well, I think
move to it.
We don't get a chance to talk to him that often, and I'd certainly appreciate the chances that we do. Part of this idea is traveling with a package of legislation moving through the House that gets rid of our local sales deductions. And Washington and Alaska are unique in that we don't have an income tax and we get to deduct. Are you supportive of that concept? And in addition, there are some thought that they would package this legislation up with another try at healthcare where they would go back to block granting Medicaid. Are you supportive of those concepts as part of a package just to get ANWR opened up?
Senator Cantwell, I have certainly looked at the package, and I will evaluate the package in its entirety. I've not been through as thorough as I'd like to, because I've been getting ready for this hearing today, obviously. You know, we look at that as us as a part of the solution on the deficit revenues from Alaska, because the royalties will be shared equally between the federal government and the state of Alaska. So we see that certainly as, if there's interest in reducing the federal deficit, I'm certainly interested in reducing the state deficit. So that's where my focus is today.
Well, we will get you information, but our analysis is that Alaskans will pay about $1,100 to $1,400 tax increase, and individuals $900 under that sales tax deduction idea. So I think it's a bad idea for our state and your state, and certainly I hope no one around here takes the bait on block granting Medicaid just to open up ANWR. So, but thank you for being here, Governor.
We will do all we can to open up ANWR. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just for a point of fact,
Senator Cassidy.
health care reform is not part of this. Block granting Medicaid is not part of this. It can be a disinformation campaign put out there to obscure the truth. We will come back to health care reform, but that should not be spoken of here as if it is germane to the argument. That is misleading to the American people.
I think
We
it's
do
very
have
relevant.
somewhat limited jurisdiction here in the Energy Committee. Our instruction is to find $1 billion, and as we've mentioned repeatedly, that we have that opportunity within the 1002 area of Alaska. Governor, Senator, Congressman, thank you for being here this morning. Let's call up the second panel, please. And as you are getting seated, I will provide brief introductions. We've heard from our governor, Governor Walker. His lieutenant governor and a partner is our Lieutenant Governor Byron Malott. Lieutenant Governor is a leader of great renown in our state, an Alaska Native leader hailing from Yakutat, and has had an opportunity to appear before our committee on numerous occasions, so we welcome him back. His testimony will be followed by Mr. Greg Sheehan. Greg is the Principal Deputy Director for Fish and Wildlife Service at Department of Interior, so it's good to have you before the committee. Mr. Samuel Alexander has joined us, and we welcome him as a tribal member from the Gwich'in tribal government. Thank you for being here this morning and traveling such a long distance. And Mr. Matthew Rexford. Matthew is the tribal administrator in the native village of Kaktovik, the one community, the one village within the 1002 area. It's good to have you here, Matthew. So, Lieutenant Governor, if you would like to lead off this morning, we've asked you to try to limit your comments to about 5 minutes. Your full statement will be incorporated as part of the record, and after the conclusion of your testimony, we'll have an opportunity to ask specific questions of each of you. So, Lieutenant Governor, thank you again for traveling the long distance and again being before the committee. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Cantwell, members of the committee. The statement of Governor Walker in the record details the reasons clearly that Alaska, the state of Alaska, supports the issue before the committee, that the need for development is clear, that the need for the revenue is clear, that the availability of revenue should development take place will be real. I want to focus my remarks briefly on the history of, as also has been spoken to, of the ANWR issue. I was here as a young staffer during the development in the Senate, as a young staffer during the development of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and NILCA, and ultimately the federal classifications in Alaska flowed from ANCSA in Section D2 of that act. There were bargains made that were made very clear to Alaska, which from time to time I had the opportunity to help develop, and which in practice I saw go away. In my home village of Yakutat, I saw preserve areas created in the St. Elias National Park, in which we were promised as Native residents, as Native subsistence users, as folks who lived in that area for centuries, were promised that we could use that area into the future. They were carved out for that purpose. And I saw camps that my family owned and others in our community used for generations burned down by the National Park Service, regardless of what had been promised to us by this Congress. I see in ANWR the 1002 area being an area in which the Congress made a promise to Alaska and to our country that we would develop those resources should they be able to be done safely, should they meet the market tests, should they be able to be brought to market. We see a complete infrastructure on the north slope of our state with a pipeline to market. As the governor said, that is now only 25% of capacity. We see Point Thompson literally on the border of the 1002 area with the infrastructure to allow the minimal impact in the 1002 area for exploration and even development made possible without any further significant impact on the environment. We see the ability to deal with our national security requirements, which Alaska is very concerned about as we look to certain neighbors of our state, our unique global national security location. We see the need for our people. Alaska is the one state that makes use of our fishing game and plant resources as the highest priority for food security among all the uses of our resources. It's called subsistence. It is our highest public policy use. And as resources become scarce, as they cycle through the life cycles of resources, we make sure that our people who depend on those resources for their livelihood, for their lifeways, for food security, are the ones that have the ultimate access to those resources. No other state does that. My wife, my children are Athabascan. They're Koyukon, not Gwich'in. But I came to this office largely on the basis that I have fought for my entire life, the lifeways, the desire, the aspirations of Alaska's Native peoples, and I will continue to do so with every breath that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Mr. Sheehan, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee for the opportunity to present the Department of Interior's testimony on resource development in the Alaska's 1002 area. The 1002 area is contained within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I'm Greg Sheehan, Principal Deputy Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I've spoken to many people about this issue, including our dedicated and highly professional staff in Alaska. I appreciate the passion that surrounds every aspect of this issue. The debate before us is a significant policy question that Congress anticipated decades ago and one we are addressing today. The roots of this hearing date back to 1980 when the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, or ANILCA, was signed into law. That law expanded the existing Arctic National Wildlife Range to 19.3 million acres and renamed it the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. ANILCA made great strides to enhance long-term conservation and fish and wildlife resources in the refuge. The law also set aside a part of the refuge, the 1002 area, for potential development of oil and gas reserves. ANILCA designated 8 million acres of the original range as wilderness, requiring the area to be managed in accordance with the Wilderness Act. ANILCA also added the refuge purposes, including conservation of fish and wildlife populations, fulfillment of international agreements, providing for continued subsistence uses by rural residents, and ensuring water quality and quantity within the refuge. as well as defining the 1002 area within the refuge. Section 1002 of ANWR provides for the continuing assessment of the fish and wildlife resources of the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. It also provides for the analysis of the impacts of oil and gas exploration, development, and production, and authorizes exploratory activity within the coastal plain. Research, observation, and exploratory activities have been occurring on an ongoing basis since the passage of ANWR. In Section 1003 of ANWR, Congress statutorily deferred a decision regarding future management of the 1.5 million area coastal plain in recognition of the area's natural resource potential. Specifically, Section 1003 states, no leasing or other development leading to production of oil and gas shall be undertaken until authorized by an act of Congress. Since the passage of ANWR, a number of key steps were taken by the department related to the 1002 area's unique status. In an assessment completed and sent to Congress in 1987, the Secretary of Interior recommended that Congress consider leasing the 1002 area for oil and gas. Since 1987, the U.S. Geological Survey has conducted a number of assessments of the resources in the 1002 area. Their most recent economic analysis, published in 2009, determined that there is a mean estimate of 10.3 billion barrels of recoverable oil, with 80 to 90% of that volume being economically recoverable at $42 per barrel. Consistent with ANWR, the services continue to inventory, monitor, and assess the fish, wildlife, and natural resources within the 1002 area so that current data is available to inform future activity. In 1988, the Arctic Refuge's initial comprehensive conservation plan recognized the coastal plain as a critical calving area for the porcupine caribou herd, which is an important subsistence use for Alaska Native peoples. Other important wildlife species, including polar bear, migratory birds, and several fish species, inhabit the 1002 area. At the Fish and Wildlife Service, we are committed to ensuring the health of all species as Congress provides direction on future uses of this area. Last spring, Secretary Zhee visited the North Slope with Chairman Murkowski and a bipartisan Senate delegation. He signed a secretarial order that requires the U.S. Geological Survey to update its resource assessment for the 1002 area. This includes collection and consideration of new geological and geophysical data, as well as the potential for reprocessing existing data. The secretarial order does not modify any environmental or regulatory requirements for energy development. This evaluation is consistent with the scope and intent of ANWR and will provide the Department's understanding of resources within the 1002 area. The administration's FY18 budget proposes oil and gas leasing in the 1002 area, and we support Congress's effort to open the area for production. If leasing is authorized by Congress, the administration believes it will bolster our nation's energy independence and national security, provide economic opportunity for Alaskans, and provide much-needed revenue to both the state of Alaska and the federal government. Should that authorization be enacted, the Department will follow applicable environmental review requirements in the law to ensure that development of the area is conducted responsibly. Chairman Murkowski, I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Department on this issue and look forward to answering any questions you and the members of the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan, for being here on behalf of the Department. Mr. Alexander, welcome to the committee.
One Gwinzi, Shoji Sam Alexander Oji, Gwich'aa Zhee, Gwich'in Ithliga, Tanan Gwich'in. Shia Nai Clarence Jenny Alexander Gwoji, Gwich'aa Zhee, Gwich'in Ginli. Good morning. My name is Sam Alexander. I'm from Fort Yukon, Alaska, but I live in Fairbanks. My parents are Clarence and Jenny Alexander from Fort Yukon. Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Canwell, and fellow members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Today I'm here to talk with you about why my people, the Gwich'in Nation, adamantly oppose the opening of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. As a graduate of West Point and as a prior U.S. Army Special Forces officer, my people have asked me to speak because I walked in two worlds, your world and the Gwich'in world. So, why do we oppose the opening of the refuge to drilling? At the heart of the issue is freedom, the freedom for us to continue to exist as Indigenous people, to exist as Gwich'in. What does it mean to be a Gwich'in? The word Gwich'in means people of a place, and for tens of thousands of years, our place has been the land now known as Northeastern Alaska and Western Canada. To be a Gwich'in is to be connected to the land. To be a Gwich'in is to believe that the land and animals on it are owed our deepest respect. In that regard, it is our duty as Gwich'in to protect the land and animals. We as Gwich'in see the desire to open up the refuge as an attack on us and on the porcupine caribou herd on which we depend. Like many Gwich'in, I served in the U.S. military. As a Green Beret, I deployed to Iraq to free the oppressed. Little did I realize that I'd come home to find my own people's freedom under attack. When we advocate for our traditional ways, we are sometimes viewed with derision, as if we were trying to fight the unstoppable advance of progress. But we take the long view and we embrace our traditional ways because they've served us well for millennia. Even people down here have started to embrace our ways. You see it in renewed interest in diets free of processed food, what we would call our traditional diet. Science now tells us that walking amongst the natural world is good for your brain. You don't have to tell a Gwich'in person that. In fact, when somebody's looking unhealthy, we say, "Nana katwatsa hindi," go to your land. We say that because we know that the land will heal you. The land is essential to our way of life. It provides us sustenance, and we view it as sacred. The caribou come from a place we call Ijikwatsan Kwantai Gotlit, the sacred place where life begins. And these very grounds are being threatened by oil development. A study by the National Research Council outlines how drilling on the North Slope has already disrupted the migration behavior of caribou. This brings us to the issue of food security. What is food security? According to the United States Department of Agriculture, food security means access by all people at all times to enough food for an active, healthy life. Food insecurity is defined as a household level, economic and social condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate food. What is adequate food? For Gwich'in, the only real adequate food is food that comes from the land. Caribou, moose, salmon. We have a hard time eating your health food. As a cadet at West Point, I tried following a healthy diet full of fruits and vegetables, and it was disastrous. I found out years later I couldn't eat tomatoes, apples, and a whole host of other healthy foods. Over the thousands of years of calling the Arctic home, we had adapted to a largely animal-based diet. It wasn't until I started eating more traditional Gwich'in food that I started to feel healthy again. The opening of the refuge to oil development and subsequent decline of the porcupine and caribou herd will limit our access to traditional healthy food and push us from food security into the realm of food insecurity. No amount of money can replicate our healthy traditional diet. No amount of money can replicate our ways. Tell me how replacing caribou with highly processed foods is going to be better for us. It will not. If we had to rely on our stores for food, we'd be looking at a steady diet of Spam, macaroni and cheese, and other shelf-stable delicacies, often at 4 or 5 times the price of what you find in the lower 48. And to what end are you opening up the refuge? To what end will you destroy our way of life? You aren't addressing climate change, which has been stressing other food sources as well as stressing the caribou. You aren't addressing our nation's growing deficit. In fact, opening the refuge represents a drop in the bucket of our budget ills. You aren't even addressing energy security. As a former Special Forces officer, I fail to see how opening a refuge at a time when we're already a net exporter of energy provides us any geopolitical advantage. We are hard-pressed to understand your reasoning behind opening the refuge. So I'll leave you with this. The late traditional Chief Moses Sam of Arctic Village once said when describing his upbringing on the land, "I was never hungry. It was a rich life." We Gwich'in live a rich life. We live a rich life because of our connection to the land and to the porcupine caribou herd. Money can't buy our wealth, but the reckless pursuit of money can take it away. And for that, we will never stop fighting to protect the porcupine caribou herd in our way of life. Thank you for your time. Masit cho.
Masi Cho. Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Rexford, welcome to the committee.
Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. My name is Matthew Rexford, and I serve as the tribal administrator for the native village of Kaktovik. I am also the president of the Kaktovik Inupiat Corporation. Both NVK and KIC serve as members of the Voice of the Arctic Inupiat, along with 18 other North Slope communities, entities. I was raised and live in Kaktovik, Alaska, located inside the 1002 area of ANWR. All of the organizations I previously mentioned, NVK, KIC, Voice, support oil and gas development there. Approximately 92,000 acres of surface lands in and around the community are owned by the Kaktovik Inupiat Corporation, our village corporation. These lands are within and are then surrounded by ANWR. We are an island in the middle of the largest wildlife refuge in America. Much of that land is also the ancestral home of the Inupiat. Our people are the indigenous inhabitants of the region and have used the resources it has blessed us with for more than 10,000 years. While many refer to the controversial section of ANWR as the 1002 area, this is the home of the Kakturvik, the people of Kakturvik. The bowhead whale, caribou, Dall sheep, musk oxen, and the fish of the region are a vital food source to the Kakturvik. Another of those natural resources is oil and gas, and lots of it. We rely on the bounty of the land and find sustenance within ANWR. Since the mid-1980s, our people have fought unsuccessfully to open our homelands to responsible exploration and development. At the same time, Lower 48 lawmakers and special interest groups in the country have waged war on the idea, citing the disruption of wildlife and the pristine Arctic environment. Kakturvik and the Arctic Inupiat will not become conservation refugees. We do not approve of efforts to turn our homeland into one giant national park, which literally guarantees us a fate with no economy, no jobs, reduced subsistence, and no hope for the future of our people. We are already being impacted by restrictions of access to the federal lands for subsistence purposes. As ANWR debates occur, the views of the Kakturvik are often left out. In fact, this is precisely why the leadership of the Arctic Slope region created Voice in 2015. We were tired of outsiders living thousands of miles away, speaking on our behalf, and driving Arctic policy decisions that directly affect us and our communities. My fellow Inupiat and I firmly believe in a social license to operate, and perhaps no other potential project in the history of America has called for such a blessing from local indigenous peoples more than this one. We Inupiat have the benefit of decades of experience working with the oil and gas industry to implement stringent regulations to protect the lands through best management practices, and the industry consistently has lived up to our standards. We know development in ANWR can be done safely because it's already being done safely all over the Arctic. We think that now is the time to open ANWR to measured exploration and development for the benefit of our community, all of Alaska, and the nation. Thank you.
Mr. Rexford, thank you. And thank you to each of you on the panel here this morning. We'll now begin with a round of questions, 5 minutes to each member here. Mr. Rexford, I want to begin with you, if I may. And I do so because I believe that you are right in your statement that so often the voice of the people who actually live within the 1002 area, the area that we are speaking about today, are often either not heard or just overwhelmed by outside voices. I think people are often surprised when they realize that there is a village within the 1002 area, that there are people who live there, that the community of Kaktovik you fly into, and that there's an airstrip there, that you have a school for your children, you have a community hall, you have a store where I think most who go in are shocked and horrified by the prices, but that you live and work and raise your families within the 1002 area. And I think oftentimes, and I go back to the map that I showed initially, this is an area the size of the ANWR is an area the size of the state of California. The 1002 area is an area the size of Delaware. But there is one village in Delaware, and that village of Kaktovik is the home to you and your family and to others. Can you provide for the community a little bit of the expectation that the people of Kaktovik might have from the development of the 1002 area? Again, we're talking about a small piece You've seen development at Point Thompson, which is just 45 miles from the village of Kaktovik. If you can put it in context, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman Murkowski. Yes, the benefits to the community of Kaktovik will be a lot because the North Slope Borough has a tax base, and that is our regional municipal borough who taxes industry, and that provides the infrastructure that has provided so much to our communities. It provided us roads, houses, schools, clinics, be able to flush our toilets. And so, yes, the benefits, we've seen the benefits, and we do not want to go backwards. We do not want to hinder the economy of the North Slope Borough.
Thank you, Matthew. I remind people that your kids, what you're hoping for your children is no different than mine or anybody else. You want them to be well-educated. You want them to have a good future. Lieutenant Governor, I'd like to ask you a question. You've spoken very passionately here, as you have in other forums, about subsistence and the identity that it is to our Alaska Native people throughout our state, whether you're up north in the 1002 area or down in Yakutat in your home community. Many will say that a subsistence lifestyle and an opportunity to access the 1002 area are not consistent, that there is an inconsistency here, that it cannot be done. Why do you believe that ANWR development within the 1002 area can occur without negatively impacting whether the porcupine caribou herd or the native subsistence way of life?
In the some 40 years of development of the Arctic for oil and gas production, the resources have been both stable and have grown and waned as their biological cycles determine. Particularly the caribou resource has grown. It has moved generally, as it always has in that region. The impact of development has been carefully managed and constrained. The management by Alaska of both the petroleum resource and the renewable natural resources, particularly fish and game, has been, as Senator Sullivan, a former Commissioner of Natural Resources of our state and Attorney General of our state, has emphasized, has been of the highest order. The priority for subsistence use of our fish and game resources is the highest statutory priority in our state. As I indicated, it is something that I personally have fought for my entire life, and whether it is the Gwich'in, the Inuit, the Tlingit, or any other rural user group of our natural resources, the state of Alaska has that management and that responsibility as its highest priority, and we will continue to fight for it.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Mr. Alexander, thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for articulating what I think so many people know, or a lot of people know intuitively, that our great outdoors provides great relief. It's one of the reasons why our veterans have been so outspoken against this administration's wrong-headed policies, whether it's tacking on park fees or trying to run over Antiquities Act, whatever it is. I so appreciate our veterans being so supportive of making sure we have a place to fish and hunt and recreate. So thank you for that. And I just would point out for the record, I think there have been something like 640 oil spills in Alaska's North Slope since 1995, including 13 spills of over 10,000 gallons. Since 2009, the thousands of gallons of oil drilling have spilled into the North Slope as a result of those operations, including a 2000 British Petroleum was ordered to pay $22 million in civil and criminal penalties because it illegally disposed of hazardous waste containing benzene and other toxic chemicals. And in 2011, BP Exploration Alaska was ordered to pay $25 million in civil penalties for spilling an estimated 213,000 gallons of crude oil from its pipelines onto the North Slope. So we know what happens. We know what happens. So the notion that people think that this is commensurate is, I think the science doesn't support that, but we'll find out what the Secretary says. On the Gwich'in and the caribou population, you talked about the migration impacts, and I know that we've seen some changes in that caribou population. What is the biggest concern here in the development, that the migration will move out of the reach of subsistence for the Gwich'in people, or could you explain what it is that we're so concerned about?
You know, it's interesting when you're down here in the States and you want to go get some food, you go to the store and you grab you some beef and cost you maybe $4 a pound or something like that. You want to get something organic, nice and tasty and healthy for you, it's going to cost you about $10, $15 a pound. So as Gwich'in, we recognize that we already have that tasty organic caribou running around up there, and it plays a big part of our diet. And so what we're concerned with is that, you know, we call this place Gwich'in, the sacred place where life begins. This is where the porcupine caribou herd calve. This is it, folks. This is the only spot that they have their calving. And we're concerned that you have any type of disruption in that calving ground. It's not that they're going to move elsewhere, it's that they're not going to exist. If you take a look at the boundaries of the Gwich'in Nation, it follows the path of the caribou. So when people talk about, you know, us being not in the 1002 area, that's, you know, true in one sense, but in the other sense, we speak for the caribou. That's why we're here. We're their voice. And they live in that 1002 area. That's where their babies are born. All right? That's where their children come from. And it's our responsibility to ensure that they have a safe place to do that, to calve. And it's our responsibility to future generations of Gwich'in people to ensure that we maintain our livelihood, which is tied to the caribou. So very important for us.
And have we seen changes in that population closer to the area where drilling has happened?
You know, people always bring up the central herd and they talk about how the numbers have grown. They say there's more caribou there. Well, more of something doesn't mean healthier of something. All right, let's keep that in mind. There's Americans, we're a lot more now, aren't we? Doesn't mean we're a lot healthier. So let's keep that in mind. In terms of the impact, though, we do see an impact. The caribou, they are scared of the development. They run away from that stuff. They don't want to be out there. In fact, when we go hunting, you might not know this, but caribou actually have scouts. They have scouts that go up in the front. And when the scouts come into trouble, the rest of the herd moves. All right, so we always tell our people, you leave those scouts alone, you let them go ahead, and you let the main herd go by. So the impact that it's going to have is a real impact. And we also haven't addressed the impact of climate change. That's impacting the caribou's land as well. As there's more brush now than there's ever been in the past, they've had to change where they go. All right? This climate change is real. I just left Fairbanks and there's no snow on the ground. When I was a kid, it'd be 30 below by the time it's Halloween. It was 30 degrees when I left. And that has a real impact on the caribou as well. When it ices over, they have a harder time getting to their food. So I hope to see that this body recognizes that.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to add my support for the opening up of the coastal plain region of ANWR to responsible energy development. This proposal makes sense on a number of levels. From an economic perspective, opening up this small, remote area will provide potentially billions of dollars in federal revenues alone over the next few decades, which could be used to chip away at our staggering budget deficits that we're facing. And new development will be a boon, certainly, for Alaska, a state that's struggling with high unemployment and with its own budget shortfalls. Opening up the coastal plain also makes sense from an environmental perspective. Energy development in the United States meets some of the most rigorous environmental standards in the entire world. This is especially true in Alaska, where responsible energy production has occurred for decades without undue harm to the surrounding environment, including polar bear and caribou habitats. Much of the credit for this environmental record of responsibility should go to recent technological innovations. For example, thanks to modern drilling methods, developers can access hundreds of miles of oil, subsurface oil, while occupying just a few acres of surface land. As companies continue to innovate, the environmental and financial cost of energy development will fall even further. But perhaps the biggest single reason why I support the opening of the coastal plain is because it's widely supported by the people of Alaska, and particularly the Inupiat, who actually live in that part of the refuge. I'm a strong believer that local input should play an outsized role in land management issues. People living in, on, near the land in question should have the most significant say in it. The people closest to the land deserve to have their voices heard and deserve to have their wishes respected. Coming from the state of Utah, where the federal government owns nearly 2/3 of the land, I fully understand the frustrations of Alaskans whose lives and whose livelihoods are subject almost constantly to the whims and wishes of well-connected interest groups, regulators and politicians in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles from where the people connected to the land themselves live. So, Mr. Rexford, in your testimony, you articulated these frustrations very clearly, very passionately and eloquently. Can you talk about the importance for that we should take into account, the importance of incorporating local knowledge and input in major land decisions, including decisions like the ones that we're discussing today?
Yes, thank you, Senator Lee. I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, can you just talk to us a little bit about the importance of taking into account local knowledge and input, the local sentiment, the sentiment of people immediately affected by the land when making decisions like these?
Yes, thank you. And I would have to say that also what brought about the technological advances was the participation of the local government on the North Slope and their stringent rules and conditions and stipulations that they put in place to ensure that this is done right. And living in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is troublesome in the sense that we have limited access to our lands, to the mountains during the summer season. We cannot travel over the tundra without disturbing or harming the tundra because it is wetland. But throughout most of the year, it's frozen, and we use snow machines to go to the areas where we need to find what we are looking for.
So you experience the land differently. You have a deeper familiarity with it than say, somebody in Washington, D.C. would have. And that has an impact on the way you view it and on the way it should be managed.
Yes, very much so. And we care deeply about the caribou, about the polar bear, about the whales, more than anything else, because that is what gives us our livelihoods. We are a strong subsistence community, and much of what is caught, if we have an overabundance, is traditional knowledge to share that abundance with first the elders and those who cannot provide for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Heinrich.
Mr. Alexander, I want to thank you for being with us here today. I had a chance to visit the North Slope, places like Dead Horse, to see a number of the developments that have occurred there in the Prudhoe Bay area, and to visit the refuge as well, and to go to places like Arctic Village. I was struck by the connection, the language and cultural connections with the Navajo people in the Southwest. That really surprised me. And in listening to everyone here today, what really struck me was the way you talked about this place and how different it was from the way my colleagues talked about this place, or the way the gentleman from the Department of Interior talked about this place. They talked about the 1002 area. They talked about ANWR. ANWR, to me, sounds like a Middle Eastern country covered in sand where we should just develop lots of oil and gas. They don't talk about a refuge. And you said, this is the sacred place where life begins. Can you talk a little bit more about how your people talk about this place?
Thank you, Senator. Our people think of this place as the heart. You know, we think of Gwich'in as the heart of the refuge. Okay, this is the heart of the refuge. And, you know, it's interesting, earlier, our congressman talked about how it was just a little dot on his nose. And I thought that was funny because, you know, if I were to say to you, you want to do something about that dot on your nose, let's go ahead and have open heart surgery, you'd probably think, well, that's not a good idea, right? That's not a good idea. And so when we talk about the refuge, we talk about the land, it is tied to our language and our understanding of the world. And, you know, the Vadzai, the caribou, we are connected to them when we recognize that. You know, I hear this talk about development all the time. We need to develop this, we need to develop that. What I think we need is a little bit of understanding of the sustainability of the life that we live as Gwich'in, all right? We're not sitting here asking for anything. We're not saying we need hospitals, we need schools, we need all these things. We're not saying give us money. What we're saying is let us live as Gwich'in. Because we already recognize the wealth that we have as people. And it's nothing that you can give us. We recognize it's something that can be taken away from us. And so when we talk about the land, and we talk about the caribou, it's in reverence to them. And you know, I keep hearing, well, the locals, let's hear what the locals have to say about the 1002 area. You know what the locals are? They're caribou. Those are the locals that don't have a voice. And that's why we're here as Gwich'in.
One of the things that really struck me about that geography was how the Arctic plain, where the caribou calf, is the flat place. To the west is, frankly, an industrial zone. Mm-hmm. You can say you can say birds nest on every drilling rig, but it doesn't look like that when you're there. And then to the south and to the east are mountains. Mm-hmm. And this is the place where the caribou flow like a river, and this is the spring. And if you lose the spring, you lose the whole river, don't you?
Absolutely. And because, you know, I think there's this idea that with development, you know, you're only going to maybe harm part of the herd, or maybe they'll just move over a little bit. There's not that option for them. There's not that option. And so we're talking about the destruction of the herd and irreparable damage to our culture, to people that have been living there for tens of thousands of years. And when I say tens of thousands of years, I'm not just making up numbers. There's a place called Bluefish Cave in the Yukon Territory. It's the oldest known human campsite in North America, and that's Gwich'in territory.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Senator Cassidy.